Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries. In July 1609, a hurricane swallowed a 7-ship English fleet in the middle of the Atlantic. The flagship, a purpose-built vessel called the Sea Venture, took the brunt of the storm. For 3 days, 150 passengers and crew bailed water from a leaking hull under 30-foot waves. With the hold rapidly filling with 9 feet of water, Admiral George Somers spotted land. Knowing the ship was about to go down, he deliberately steered the Sea Venture straight toward the jagged coastline, wedging the wooden hull tightly between 2 offshore reefs. This stylized 17th-century chart shows exactly how mariners viewed their landing spot. Every single person survived the crash, wading ashore to an archipelago sailors actively avoided, the Isle of Devils. Spanish crews marked it as a cursed zone, a reputation fueled by the unnerving, demonic howls that echoed from the dense forests at night. Looking at this antique map, you can trace the massive geographic gap to their intended destination. 3,000 miles away from those isolated reefs, the struggling Jamestown colony was eagerly scanning the horizon, completely dependent on the Sea Venture's cargo to survive the winter. The 150 castaways sat on the beach, listening to the shrieks in the dark, certain they were trapped in a mythical hell. They had no idea the actual nightmare was waiting for them at their destination. Scouts venturing into the forest discovered the demons were actually feral hogs, the descendants of livestock left by Spanish explorer Juan de Bermuda a century earlier as an emergency food source. Without those supplies, Jamestown entered a brutal period recorded by history as the Starving Time. With hostile Powhatan forces keeping them confined inside their wooden fort, the colonists exhausted their meager rations. They boiled their leather shoes and belts. They stripped bark from trees. Eventually, the famine drove the survivors to dig up corpses. By the end of winter, the island's provisional governor, Thomas Gates, recognized the camp was fracturing. When the talk turned into an organized plot to seize the weapons, Gates arrested Hopkins and sentenced him to death for mutiny, ultimately pardoning him at the last second. The terrifying display of authority shut down the rebellion and forced the camp back to work. They needed to get off the island, but they had no shipyard, no heavy machinery, and very few usable tools. Over the next 10 months, the castaways executed an astonishing feat of manual engineering. This wireframe schematic shows how they pulled it off. Divers swam out to the reefs to strip the wrecked Sea Venture. Blacksmiths melted down the salvaged rigging in iron, hand-forging new chisels and saws. They cut down native Bermuda cedar, mixed a waterproof caulk out of burned shells and turtle fat, and built 2 completely new ocean-ready ships, the Deliverance and the Patience. Human willpower and rigorous engineering had successfully manufactured an escape from the island. On May 24, 1610, the 2 homemade ships finally pulled into Jamestown. They expected a bustling fort and thriving community. Instead, they were met with dead silence, open gates, and the overwhelming smell of decay. The thriving colony they imagined was gone. They found only 60 gaunt, emaciated survivors wandering slowly through the ruined cabins, looking more like ghosts than settlers. Governor Gates surveyed the depleted storehouses and the dying colonists. Making a brutal, pragmatic calculation, he decided the Virginia project was a failure. He ordered everyone onto the ships, intending to abandon Jamestown entirely and sail north to catch a ride back to England on fishing vessels. But as the refugees sailed their ships down the James River toward the ocean, they spotted sails on the horizon. It was a heavily armed relief fleet commanded by Lord Delaware, packed with fresh troops, essential survival supplies, and a year's worth of food. They had intercepted the retreat by a margin of mere hours, turning the fleet around and saving English America from total abandonment. Looking at this antique map of Bermuda, you can see the organized internal land divisions that marked its transition into a permanent colony. That transition actually began when Admiral Somers volunteered to sail the Patience back to the island to gather more wild pigs for the struggling Virginia settlement. He died on the island shortly after arriving, reportedly from a surfeit of pork, and his crew buried his heart in the Bermuda soil. When letters detailing the shipwreck, the mutiny, and the miraculous survival finally made their way back to London, they became a sensation. The terrifying storm and the magical, noise-filled island captured the imagination of William Shakespeare, providing the direct inspiration for his final solo play, The Tempest. Bermuda provided the material and leadership that prevented the total collapse of English colonization, showing that the survival of these outposts relied more on human resilience than on the myths that surrounded them.